Hello everyone. For the last 4 months I've been using Panasonic GM1 as my main camera, and this video is essentially a list of tricks, tips and various considerations for anybody who either has or is planning to get Panasonic GM1, perhaps GM5 or GF7, which are all very similar cameras. So what you see here is my camera as it looks right now, and I will go through a few things about it, primarily starting with what is it good for. You may consider that Panasonic GM1 is just for as an entry camera for stylish, whatever purposes, not really suitable for enthusiasts. I considered it against GX7, GH4, and all the Olympus models, and I actually decided this is the best camera I can get for myself, considering my needs of mostly social photography and taking family pictures indoors at various events. I would recommend that this is a perfect camera for an enthusiast who knows how to use prime lenses and is not afraid of having a couple of prime lenses to switch in between, and also understands the limitations of shallow depth of field, how to deal with it. At the same time, if you put a standard zoom lens on it, it is a very nice camera to be used by pretty much anybody with zero understanding what they are doing, as long as you don't expect it to perform as a world's best camera in the process. This camera delivers definitely better image quality than anything pocketable, so you do have a trade-off of carrying something which requires a camera bag usually, but it is worth it if you actually look at the performance of these sensors on a website such as DxOMark, and especially I would suggest when checking image quality, look at signal-to-noise ratios for viewing on screen, not the ones which they show for printouts, because I don't know how about you, but my personal preference is to view pictures at 100% zoom level. If that's the case, then the charts and performance of various cameras can look very, very different from what you see if you compare the printout quality. Next thing is the silent shutter, which I can demonstrate right away. This is the sound of the actual mechanical shutter, while at the same time you can put it into a mode with electronic shutter only. And now it ran out of buffer. What it means is this camera is so quiet, even with the mechanical shutter on, that you can pretty much take pictures anywhere at any amount without people noticing that you are taking all that much. One evening I managed to take over 600 images at a family gathering, and again, it was a completely different thing than like using my previous Panasonic GF1, purely because of the quietness of this camera in operation. Another obvious plus of all of these cameras is that the size of it makes it pretty much cute. People like how it looks in your hands and they cannot believe that this is something really serious. At the same time, it does look respectable. And probably the main thing to consider is price performance. Again, if you look at DxOMark charts for on-screen quality, this is pretty much as close as you get to highest level without paying many times more and getting a huge penalty in size and weight. And that applies also to something like a full-frame NEX cameras such as Sony A7 series. Okay, what are the minuses of this camera? The obvious minuses are, again, the slow shutter. The slow shutter means that you have to be careful what you do and you don't do with this camera if you want consistently reliable performance. It's not a big deal, but it's something which I personally would recommend you to do some research on if you plan to get the fullest out of this camera, and I'll provide a link for it on the video. Then, of course, the flash. There is no flash hot shoe, but there is a built-in flash which can be very nicely bounced, and you'll be amazed how good it works with bouncing, because my experience with this simple bouncing action, I managed to get very, very good quality photos on family gatherings in a typical living room with white ceiling. Obviously, in a camera of such size, the button size and the amount of control is a limitation, but in reality, from my experience, it has, and if you are smart about configuring it for your needs, I think it should satisfy pretty much anybody. Okay, let's move on to the external things about this camera, which I added or modified to make it as good as it is. First of all, almost every mirrorless camera on the market right now comes with horrible metal rings mounted for strap attachment. In fact, they are mounted from the start, so even if you don't mount a strap, which is I would very much recommend to most people, they sit there and rattle and get in the way. So a very, very good investment is to get yourself a custom attachment such as this one. In this case, I used this. It's, as you can see, mini QD loop connectors. They come 4 in a package, so I used 2 and have 2 left. As you can see, they fit very, very well with the original straps, so you don't need to worry about buying something extra except for them. And they work way better because they are much more flexible. They do make a bit of noise, so unfortunately they are not completely silent, but they allow me to quickly attach this, disconnect the strap if I suddenly want to keep this camera alone on the table. So if in a restaurant you want your camera to sit there completely inconspicuously, just throw out the strap and it is not a problem anymore. While when you're on a go and you want to change lenses or make sure that the camera is not stolen, not falls to the ground, very, very recommended to keep this attached. You probably have noticed this thing, which is a Joby micro tripod, and it's one of the coolest features I've seen for tripod use or any attachment to a camera you can come up with. Look at this. In an instant you get a tripod deployed at any point wherever you go. This has saved me in so many cases for all sorts of long exposures, group shots, anything. And if previously for my GF1 I used this to quickly put it on and off, with this camera it is so small that this tripod actually is part of a hand grip. If you look at it, it actually helps to hold the camera by pushing it onto it. And the extra thickness it provides actually makes it much more stable inside a camera bag, because one of the problems you will encounter with this camera is that it is so small that almost any camera bag designed for something bigger than a totally pocketable camera is just too wide, and you will not have it will be jumping around, rattling inside your camera bag, while this extra thickness, or what it is, height, will actually stabilize it and make it better by adding a bit of extra height. Plus you always have a functionality and you have a possibility, you have an extra grip for it. Next, it's a camera grip. By default, it comes with a very sleek front without any detents, which perhaps looks nice, but is possible to use, but it requires quite a heavy grip to feel secure. So I very much recommend, as much as same as pretty much in all the articles I've read on the internet, to consider an extra grip. And what you see here is what I came up with. It is not a perfect solution, but it turns out that Sony RX100 cameras have almost the same camera body and curvature and size. So I went to a camera shop and asked if they can give me to try on these things. And the trick is they come in a package where you can actually open it up and put it onto your camera without damaging the original product. So I ended up buying the one for the RX100 Mark 1 and Mark 2 version, which is a little bit cheaper, and it fits, as you can see, quite well. I also have photos, which you will probably see on the screen right now, for how it fits with Mark 3, which is a newer version. That version is pretty much as recommended as this one, but none of them fit absolutely perfectly. I did cut a little bit the corner in the bottom part here. I don't know if it's visible in the video, to make it fit a little bit better, but overall this grip works good, but not perfect. If you want a better grip, I would probably suggest you to invest in another one, which is a custom grip out of metal, which I cannot on the spot come up with a name of, but you will again see the link to it in the review in the description. So this grip is one of the cheapest and high quality grips you can add, and for my liking it doesn't work perfectly, it doesn't feel good enough, but it still improves dramatically the control of the camera, and you can do things which you would never do with a camera without a grip. Moving on, let's go through the lens hood. As you see, I'm all the time using this camera with a lens hood attached. In fact, what I have here is a kit camera with a 15mm f1.7. Very highly recommended lens from me. As you can see, it is very stable to be put standing on it like this. And the lens hood obviously protected from pretty much all sorts of impacts of running into animals, kids, hitting it against other people. So very nice attachment which comes standard with this lens. Next thing I wanted to talk about is the camera bag. And for camera bag, I would heavily suggest a bag like my Kata. In fact, probably I have to advertise this specific model, which is a Marvel 40DL, Marvel X 40DL. This camera bag is amazing because of for my usage, obviously, because it fits my camera to sit very much ready for action and covered, while at the same time strapped on my neck simultaneously. So the camera strap is hanging on my neck, while the camera bag is hanging on me like a shoulder bag across the side, which makes it very stable on me. And at the same time, the camera is fully protected under all the covers, while the zipper is open, and I can pull it out at any moment, fully working with even lens cap off, obviously, and take my shot and put it back in without any problems whatsoever. I don't know if any other design which beats this in terms of usability. And then of course it comes with an extra pouch here, which allows you to on the go pull out your second lens. Okay, from this angle it's kind of unusual, and replace it while the camera is hanging on your neck. Put it back in. There's an extra battery, by the way, fits in there as well. So you have perfect carrying bag for one camera with a lens and another lens attached as a backup. Even more, it has a compartment here, which I used to use for the Joby tripod. So I stick in the tripod in there for my previous GF1 camera. But nowadays, when this GM1 is so small, I actually keep it attached to a camera. So what I instead use it for is for lens caps. So I actually have a dedicated pocket on the camera bag where I can securely store all the lens caps when I am actively shooting, and then put them back on, obviously, out of the same place. Also inside there I have a small microfiber cloth in case I really need to clean the lens. So here you go, that's my camera bag of choice, and I highly recommend it for anybody who considers using Micro Four Thirds camera or similar with two lenses of a reasonable size. So, as of next part, I'll go through the controls on this camera, and an obvious concern for this camera buyers is, are the controls too small? So, let me demonstrate you. This is how I actually use this camera when outside in the cold weather. The fact is, yes, the controls are small, but they are not all that small. You can easily turn on the camera with a nice physical switch. The shutter button is very nice and soft compared to, for example, Olympus cameras. They tend to have very hard to press final depression on the shutter, which to me felt a little bit uncomfortable. Here the shutter is very nice to control, and when you depress you don't shake the whole camera. Then you have a mode dial, which as you see right now for me stands on C1. GF7 users do not have such mode, which is a pity, but yeah, it's not very comfortable to use, but it works very nicely even in gloves. Then there is a function button, which I have remapped to put on autofocus and auto exposure lock, which is useful if you consider to take out of camera stitched panoramas. GF7 and GM5 users have in-camera panoramas stitching, which works, I assume, quite okay, but GM1 does not have that. Still, you can activate this auto exposure, autofocus lock at a certain point, take your shots around, and then use a out of camera programs such as completely free Microsoft ICE, I believe, image composite editor, which does panorama stitching beautifully, and it's completely free to use. So that's what I have mapped on this button. So the autofocus control dial here is actually quite useful for quickly switching focus modes, especially when you want to shoot video, because in video I often use manual focus as it is the most reliable one if I need to really do critical shooting. So going on to the back, we have the video start stop button, which is very difficult to press on mistake, so it is, at the same time, it is easily pressable even in gloves. You have the playback button, which again goes to switch on and off in gloves. You have a display control modes, which is very nice because it gives you 4 modes with or without level indicator. I kind of like this mode as well, where you have nothing but level indicator. The problem is that it doesn't show you the exposure scale, which you do see if you put on the full information. Now when you rotate the adjustments, then this extra scale is not shown in the smallest, most minimalistic display mode. Like now, I'm changing the same control, and that's all the information you get. Let's put it back to autofocus mode. Then there is a menu button, of course. Inside here you can navigate with the rotary controller, or of course with a touchscreen, which probably does not work in such thick gloves, unsurprisingly. Back button. So as you can see, it actually is very usable even in thick gloves for pretty much all the basic functions you would like to have on a go. So further on I will go without gloves because we need to use a touchscreen. For the autofocus of face detection here works very, very well. In fact, I pretty much use it automatically, even though at any point it will focus to that point. Autofocus is very, very reliable, which is something I was very disappointed when using Olympus EP5 for a while. Maybe it's not such a big difference, but I really felt like somebody gave me a broken camera. Here on the Q menu you have the quick menu, where you in principle have many different things you can configure, and it can look in 2 different ways. I use this way of displaying it, which I was thinking for quite a long time which one of them is best, this specialized view or a more generic one, which I don't want to switch to right now. I think both of them are good. The important part is that if you leave it at the, in this case, ISO sensitivity selection, this is where it will return every time you go back to it. So even though this camera does not have dedicated ISO selection menu button or something, every time I press on Q menu, I am immediately in ISO selection menu unless I have switched to something else. So most of the time it is extremely easy to just tap and select whatever ISO I need at the moment. I use it usually in auto mode, and by just pressing a shutter I have already confirmed it and it's already working as usual. Function buttons. I use, what do I use in function buttons? Okay, these are the standard buttons, but function buttons I have configured electronic shutter type up here because in some modes if you use a shutter priority, aperture priority, you might want to change that quickly. I have a level indication button, which actually is not needed because you can change it by display. I have whatever this is. I actually don't use it. Really don't use it. Wi-Fi button, very useful. I will not go into it right now, but yeah, you can use smartphones for remote controlling camera, which works quite well. It's not a substitute for your main display, but it's okay. Sometimes you can do some fun spy shots. And this is the shutter speed effect. I actually, again, don't use it. So all the buttons I actually need on this camera are mapped already on hardware controls. There's a shutter, exposure and autofocus lock. There is a exposure compensation, you can activate on and off, white balance, autofocus modes, which I typically keep on face detection, and if I need to have a point, I just tap wherever I need, and it's already there. I use the smallest possible autofocus point. I think everybody should consider using the smallest one. Drives, I always keep it in medium speed burst mode because it gives you pretty good sequential speed, and at the same time, yeah, I think it's good practice for everybody to always take more than one shot of every scene you are trying to take. In case the first shot is blurry for whatever reason, you always have at least something more. So my standard drive mode is burst M, and if you need to have timers, here, by the way, you can select this with a rotary controller if you're wearing gloves. So self-timer right now is standing on 2 seconds for long exposures, or if I press up for more settings, I can set, for example, for 10-second timer with 3 pictures taken, which is what you would use group photos. And that is pretty much most of the buttons. As you can see, they are very much user-friendly, even for enthusiasts. I don't think as an enthusiast you need much more than this. I would consider myself enthusiast to a reasonable level, and it works so far very nicely. Another thing I wanted to tell is this lens has a dedicated aperture control, and I would say I don't like at all how Panasonic did it. They only allow to use it in aperture priority mode or in manual mode. So, and when you use it, it actually has a delay. So when you adjust it, it takes a little bit of lag between when you adjust it and the camera actually shows you what you have selected. It's okay, it's still fun to use, but I'm a little bit disappointed how exactly it is implemented by Panasonic. It should be working in all modes, not just in aperture and manual mode, if you ask me. Okay, one of the limitations of Panasonic cameras is that you have very little control over the logic of auto ISO. At which point do they switch? At which point does it increase ISO? At which point it increases or decreases shutter speed? So by default, with this lens, it tries to keep 1/60th of a second exposure, which is quite good. But in some cases, you may want to still go lower in exposure time to preserve image quality. With 45mm lens, which is 90mm equivalent in 35mm equivalent, it tries to keep 100th of a second, which is again quite good, but what do you do if the camera runs into too high ISO? For that, I configured for myself that C1 and C2 have like 2 custom modes, are pre-programmed to have a limit, ISO limit. ISO limit is set to 1500, 1600. Which to my opinion is a pretty good top limit for ISO for this camera in low light conditions, and it allows me to get most of the shots I want with these lenses at f1.7, f1.8. It works quite well with the upper limit of 1600. The difference between C1 and C2 is that C1 is set to always use mechanical shutter, and C2 is set to always use electronic shutter. So if I need ultimate stealthiness, I set it to C2. If I need a little bit better image quality and to avoid any possible distortions with electronic shutter, I switch to C1, which is, by the way, the mode in which I keep this camera most of the time. So, some final tips and tricks. autofocus during video can be pretty ugly. So my suggestion for taking a video is switch to manual focus, and you have quite good focus peaking, which will tell you where you are focused at the moment, which works very well in video while recording video, unlike some Olympus cameras. And you have autofocus assist, so you can actually ask camera to focus on some point and then do the adjustments from there manually. For panoramas, I already said I use external program, which does it very well, and that is something to keep in mind. Do you really need very wide angle lenses? Because most of the time, things you need very wide angle lenses for can be done with stitching nowadays, and you save a lot of money, and also you don't carry some lens which is only for very wide angle shots. Then very important bit is extra battery. This camera does have a small battery pack, and I actually compared it. It is exactly 1/2 thickness of the old battery from GF1 camera. So even if it takes half the shots on the charge, it is perfectly understandable. Just my recommendation, do get a second battery for this camera. You will need it. And final consideration about the choice of lenses. As you see, my choice is 15mm lens here, which could be as well 20mm lens, which I used before, f1.7. The great thing about this lens was it came as a kit together with this camera, so I almost got the camera for free. And it has silent autofocus, so it is very, very, very usable for video. In fact, because of the focal length and the aperture settings, I can keep it in fully automatic mode and still have pretty good depth of field all the time in video. And my second lens of choice is 45mm portrait lens for all those shots where you need a little bit of distance. Then I would also recommend to still keep in mind the most basic standard zoom. I still have one like this. Is actually very useful if you are going on vacation to some place where you have lots of sunlight, somewhere in the south. I was a little bit stupid. I took these two primes from Canary Islands, and I ended up using all the time them in modes where I could have just had my standard zoom, and I didn't have any advantage in apertures from using these fancier lenses. Well, this would be just more convenient, and it has image stabilization built in. Also, right now, Panasonic has announced 42.5mm lens of their own, which is very similar to this Olympus, and has image stabilization in it. I would very much recommend to invest in image stabilization for this camera at such focal length. The problem is it is very expensive, so I already have this Olympus, but if you are considering to get the best possible lens, Panasonic lens would be noticeably nicer to use, but the price penalty is something you have to decide for yourself. Okay, a few words about fixed screen. I personally wanted to have a tiltable screen, but in reality, I had for a while Olympus EP5, and I noticed that in most conditions where you take shots, you actually have very good viewing angles on all these screens, so it's not a problem to take most shots without tilting a screen. So you end up rarely tilting a screen even if you have that option. Lack of viewfinder, to me, is an obvious not an issue, because I personally don't understand the arguments that in some conditions, in sunlight, you will not see the screen. I have taken shots in all the possible weather conditions, and the only time I don't see the screen is if I wear sunglasses, but then you will hardly see anything anyway. And viewfinders is just something which limits your angle of view, and if you really want all your photos to be taken from either you standing or you crouching height, go for it, but I really don't consider that an issue for a camera like this. I hope this quite long video has given you a few ideas how to use your new camera, or perhaps convinced you that GM1 could be a camera for you. Wish you all the best.